you very much. I really wanted to start off just by saying how absolutely delighted I am that Kristen invited me to speak here. Not only because I absolutely adore Canada, so pretty much any excuse to come to Canada would be fabulous. And I've had a great couple of days, both at the conference, I've been to the aquarium where I took this photo, but also because this is the first conference I've spoken at, and I've spoken at quite a few, that's been entirely kind of focused on testing. So that's something quite new for me. And while I've been in IT for 25 years, so I started an IT degree in 1988. I did my first commercial job in Paris as a COBOL programmer. In 1990, I've been a developer, I've been a programmer, analyst programmer, systems analyst, designer, UI specialist. I had 9 miserable months as a project manager. I have never been a tester, although for sure I've done lots of testing, not least because one of my first roles out of university, I wrote middleware for real-time process control systems for nuclear power stations and the water industries, so both of which we had to be pretty stringent with testing on. So this talk and this topic for me came around a couple of years ago, and it was kind of like the perfect storm of a few things happened. So first of all, a good friend of mine from the UK, who's also an Agile coach, Liz Keogh, started badgering me a little bit because she said, well, you know, I'm sure back in the day you did some research on pair programming, and I can't find it anywhere online, Sal, so, you know, help me find stuff. So I started tweeting, and I started blogging, and as I did that, I started to remember some of the amazing research that's out there around the psychology of software development. The other thing that happened around the same time is that my oldest son got an autism diagnosis. And what happened when he got the diagnosis is I went straight into like finding out information mode. I went into research mode, and I was kind of straight away, okay, what does this mean? How can I best support him, et cetera, et cetera. And the more I read about autism, the more it all sounded pretty familiar. And I started to think, oh, you know, like some of those traits, I think I do that, and actually I have the problem with that, or I struggle with that. And so the more I thought about it, the more I came to the realization that possibly I was a little bit autistic myself. And so I phoned up my sister, who luckily is a clinical psychologist, and said to her, well, you know, Zach's had this diagnosis, and I've been thinking that actually I relate to a lot of the issues and problems, and also some of the extra super skills that can be involved with autism. Do you think I might be autistic too? And my sister paused very politely and said, well, and then she kind of said, well, I don't know if you get a diagnosis because you for sure have a lot of coping mechanisms, but I think you definitely have lots of autistic traits. So I went online and did a couple of tests. The first of which was the AQ test, which was developed by Simon Baron-Cohen at Cambridge. For the AQ test, your neurotypical person scores about 16 to 18. About 80% of people on the autistic spectrum get about 32 or higher, and I scored a whacking 41. And then just recently, and I did it again, so just on the 4th of August, because I couldn't remember my scores, I did the Ritvo Autism Diagnostic Scale Test as well, which researchers like because it gets really good inter-rater reliability. So what you can see here is, here's the threshold value for suspected autism there, 65. Here's me, 155. Okay, and just, you know, so that's the first time I've shown that publicly. There you go. And I'm also kind of a recovering talkaholic, and it makes me laugh saying this in front of groups of people where I'm just talking at. But when I started my research, and this is how it kind of all pulled together for me, when I started my research, I was absolutely convinced that we could learn most about collaboration by looking at what people said to each other. So I really thought, you know, collaboration is all about the conversations we have, about the things that we talk about the topics. And if I really want to understand, for example, how pair programmers work together, then if I can just understand what they talk about, I can understand how they can collaborate. So I got very, very interested in talking, and I looked at the research on what Mitchell and Chi calls self-explanation as a first kind of port of call, which is the idea that actually I don't even have to be talking to someone else. Just talking helps when I'm solving difficult problems, okay? So I'm sure you've all been there, right? We're sitting down, we're kind of banging our head against the terminal, thinking, oh, I just can't really quite work this out. And then I give in, I go and talk to somebody, I kind of knock on the door of a specialist and say, I'm a bit stuck. I get halfway through explaining the thing that I can't work out, and then I go, oh, hang on, never mind, doesn't matter, and I run off because actually just talking has helped me come to the solution space. And the thinking behind that is that maybe it makes me do a kind of stepwise conversation about the problem so I can see where the holes in my logic are. Maybe it helps it be a little bit more objective. But one of the interesting things about Mickey Chi's research, and people also who call it the rubber plant effect or the rubber duck effect or whatever it might be, is that this works really well for stepwise logical deduction problems, but it doesn't work very well for creative problems. Okay, so if you've got like a maths equation to solve, talking definitely can help, but other areas not so much. And there's loads of other reasons why talking and collaborating and talking is really good, not least because when we're talking, if we're working in a group that's physically co-located, we can overhear each other. Right? So I might be sat down and I'll hear someone say, blah, 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 the error handling, and I'll be like, oh, I know about the error handling, hang on. And then the blah, 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 something else. And I'll say, oh, well, hang on, I don't think that actually is how that works. Shall I come and help you out? And I saw a lot of this, both in my professional life and in my research, this kind of peripheral awareness of what's around, where I might not be focusing on what other people are saying, but I can kind of, my ears can prick up when my name or a specialist subject that I'm interested in comes up. So talking's definitely interesting. And we also know that it's not just about people talking together. So again, here we go, a cruise ship pulling out of a harbour. And I think Nicholas Carr mentioned this a little bit yesterday, that when people in groups are doing difficult things, like developing and testing software, or navigating big cruise ships out of harbours, we can't rely entirely on the technology or even tools. We don't rely entirely on having an ace super duper captain of the boat or whatever. That's not enough. That actually we rely on a system of interaction between people, tools, methods, processes, ideas, all of those things working together. So when I'm working in a team, it's not just about me and the screen. It's not just about me and the person I'm working with and the screen. It's the IDE, it's the test suites, it's back in the day, it's the physical talking tokens we had, it's the stuff on the wall, it's the charts, it's the stuff showing progress. All of those things together build this kind of rich web of interaction that lets us work together in these incredibly complex areas. And the reason that I use the navigation of a big vessel as an example is there's a seminal book on this called Cognition in the Wild by Ed Hutchins, where he literally does an ethnographic study on a large boat, because he's like, how do these huge boats get out of these tiny harbours? And what he finds is there are people posted all around the boat that shout up to each other, and then someone else will look at an instrument and shout that to somebody else, and it's the interaction of all these people together that allows this complex behaviour to happen. So talking's good. Talking's interesting. Talking helps us solve problems. I was feeling really good about my research around now, like, yep, I like talking too, that's great. And then a result came up that I was surprised about. And so I recorded, transcribed, and analyzed 14,866 sentences of pair-programmer dialogue. That feels like a kind of like a bit of an admission there. And I didn't even think I was autistic at the time or anything. But so nearly 15,000 sentences of pair-programmer dialogue, and I sliced it and diced it in lots of different ways, and I thought about it in lots of different ways as well. And one thing that really surprised me was when I took the pairers and I split them into those that were more and less expert at what they did, what I found is the people with more experience talked less. But it's all about talking, so if they're really good at collaborating. So that kind of broke my model quite a lot. It seems like some of the magic of collaboration happens in the quiet spaces between the conversations. And that resonated with me pretty well because another person in the Agile space that I respect very much, Ivan Moore, had been talking for ages about this thing called T-driven development, kind of like quite Britishly saying, well, you know, if we have a problem to solve together, then we should make a cup of tea, because actually I'll go away and boil the kettle on my own. I'll have some quiet time to think about how I'm going to solve the problem. Okay. Then we'll pour the tea, we'll sit down, we'll drink the tea together, and we'll discuss how we're going to go about. You know, maybe you've got different ideas to me, and we've incubated different ideas. And only once we've done both of those things will we actually fingers on keyboards. Okay? And then when we get stuck, that's okay, because we'll just have another cup of tea. And Ivan quite likes tea, so it works really well. And one of the other things that's really difficult for us to express is tacit knowledge. And again, Nicholas touched on this yesterday morning in his keynote. There are some things we can't express. I think Nicholas said we don't even understand how we drive cars, okay? As a software developer, I think of tacit knowledge as compiled knowledge that we've lost the source code for. We just can't remember anymore how we gained that information. And I've got pills up here because there's some really fantastic research that was done with people in the medical profession around tacit knowledge that showed that if you ask a really experienced doctor or consultant or whatever, how did you get to a diagnosis, right? So you saw these symptoms, and how did you get to this really complicated diagnosis? They can tell you, they can more or less draw you a flow diagram. Right, so this happened, and then I had to choose between this and this, so we experimented with this approach. That didn't work, so I went off down here, and then I looked at some other symptoms. They didn't have those, so then I went this way, and it looks really, really logical. But if you record the conversations and the things that they've actually done in the diagnosis, it doesn't match. So they can kind of retrospectively apply logic to their tacit knowledge, but it doesn't match how it actually played out. So they don't really know the process through which they came. It just kind of felt right. Just like sometimes when you're testing or whatever, something just doesn't feel right. And you go, you know, I'm going to explore that area just a little bit more because it kind of feels wrong. One more bit about being quiet then. So this is the creativity process from Wallace, and this has been around since 1926. Sorry, slightly off the bottom there. So there are 4 stages to creativity, and we need creativity in any endeavor we do, really. So the first piece is preparation, where we gather information about the problem space and understand it. And then the second piece is where we incubate. We need time away from the problem space, so we're not directly, just to let our mind kind of meander around a little bit and not take the shortest route from here to get to a solution. Because we probably tried that already and it didn't work. That's why we need to be creative, right? And we know that that incubation period is really, really important, and it's best served when we move away into maybe a different physical space. We know that we incubate creativity really well when we do like repetitive physical activities. Like running works really well for me, but it might be walking or juggling or something like that. Moving into a space that looks different or has different sounds or even smells different to where we are before. And then once we've had this period of incubation, we get illumination, we come up with an idea, and then we can verify it. And I'm sure you've all like gone home at some point, thought I'm just going to give up on this thing, had a night's sleep, woken up in the morning, maybe got in the shower and gone, oh, how did I not see that? It was so obvious. And that's because you've had this period of incubation. This picture, by the way, is a luminarium. Isn't it fantastic? So these are created as creative spaces specifically for incubation. And you can project different kind of textures, colors, scents, music on them and walk around them. And this is what they look like from the outside. So they kind of pop up. But this one, I think, is in Sydney. It's pretty unlikely you're going to get one of those in your office car park, though, I'd have thought. So you might need to think a little bit more creatively about how you're going to create spaces for incubation. Okay, so the outcome of all of that good thinking was that, you know what, turns out knowing when to shut the heck up is an expert behavior, and one that maybe I'm not very good at. And I'm doing a lot of thinking at the moment about how we can be more inclusive in our collaboration, because I'm a certified Scrum trainer, I'm a coach, I'm a consultant, and quite often when I run workshops or do training, the focus has always been on intense collaboration, right? Think on your feet, let's all have ideas, let's do post-it notes, let's do all that kind of stuff. And actually what I'm trying to understand is, how do we cater for more diversity in our collaboration? Okay. And if we need diversity in terms of quiet times and more kind of interactive, intensely interactive times too, then what other diversity do we need? So this has always been on my slide deck. I'm just really happy that I'm in Canada now. Because I think this is a great quote, obviously not specifically about the software industry, but diversity fosters new ideas. It isn't just the sound social policy. Diversity is the engine of invention. Anne-Marie, I don't know if she's here. Anne-Marie yesterday, talking about her testing teams, right? Our strength was in our diversity. And there are two great books that I love around diversity. First of all, The Wisdom of Crowds, which I think a lot of people probably come across by now, which shows that if you need to estimate, a good approach is to get a load of people to guess and take the average. And there are some constraints around kind of when that best works. But so that's The Wisdom of Crowds by James Surowiecki. And by far and away, my very favorite work on diversity is Scott Page. So Scott Page wrote this book called The Difference, How the Power of Diversity Creates Better Groups and stuff like that. Scott started modeling problem solving in teams, in groups. And what he found was, if he built teams out of experts, the very best performers, and put them together, they didn't perform as well as diverse teams. So teams that were randomly put together typically performed better than teams made up only by the top performers. And he was really surprised by that. So he started looking around for examples of that in the real world. Because that's what his models were showing. And the story that Scott likes to tell is about one of them anyway, is about the Netflix prize. So Netflix in, I think it was 2000, wanted to improve the algorithm that they use for suggesting new movies to people. So they said, if any team can improve our algorithm by 10%, we will give them $1 million. So, you know, quite a good incentive right there, I think. Oh, sorry, it was 2006. And so three researchers that were very, very super well qualified got together and created a team called Belcore. And they worked really hard, and they managed to get the algorithm to about 6.8% better than it was before, but they could not get near the 10%. And so what they then did was they joined their biggest competitor and merged the models together. And they saw their percentage creeping up. And then another team, who called themselves Ensemble, started bringing together almost as many algorithms from other teams as they possibly could. And what they found was, by merging together, in the end it was 23 teams from 30 different companies, they got over the 10%. And it ended up being kind of neck and neck between them and Belcore. And everybody said that the surprise was that the collaborative approach worked so well that almost trying everyone's algorithms and putting it together outperformed what the real experts in the field could do when they were in a small group. So if we need diversity, then I think we need neurodiversity, because really, when you think about it, developing and testing software is brain work. So if we need diversity, we need diversity of brains. That makes total sense. And the phrase neurodiversity was coined, I don't know exactly who coined it, but it came out of the autism kind of movement. And folks with autism kind of started thinking about the fact that maybe autism oughtn't be looked at like an illness. Like maybe it was just a natural, diversification in the human genome. And maybe it's been around all the time. And that rather than try to cure or suppress autism, we do much better to create an environment where you know, we embrace neurodiversity, we support it, because it's not something that ought to be cured so much as it's just part of being humans. So when I started thinking about autism, when I did some tests on myself, and when I thought about all the amazing people I've worked with in the last 25 years, I started looking into autism and tech and the link between the two. So just generally, autism affects 1 in 68 people. I'm just looking to check for Canada. That's about 500,000 people in Canada that have got autism, just in the general population. So, and it seems like there's a link between autism and tech. So this is just a sample of some of the studies out there, and there are heaps. So Baron Cohen at Cambridge, autism occurs more in families of physicists, engineers, and mathematicians. Wyndham, mothers of autistic kids are more likely to work in technical occupations. Rufsemer, I'm not even sure how to say that, but I think that's kind of roughly right. Significantly more autism in children in IT-rich regions than other regions. And Wei's finding as well that ASD students are more likely to choose science, technology, engineering, or maths at college. So, and there are heaps of these studies. This is just like 4 samples from all the studies that are out there. And then there's this lady. So this is me, my husband, my eldest son, and Temple Grandin. So I don't know, in Canada, do people know who Temple is? So there's maybe about half of people are nodding. So Temple Grandin was profoundly autistic. She's probably the most famous autist in the world, I'd say. She was profoundly autistic. She was completely non-verbal to the age of 4. She's now a highly successful professor in the States. Her specialism is cattle handling, humane cattle handling systems. And about 50% of the cattle handling systems in America are based on her designs. So phenomenally successful. The other 50% of her time Temple spends researching, advocating, and talking about autism. So we're really lucky. We've got a mutual friend who's in cattle handling. How lucky is that? Who looks after Temple when she comes to the UK. And so we've met her privately a couple of times now. She's absolutely amazing lady. And when you see her, so when I first started reading about Temple, I was amazed to see, like, she's talking at Google, she's talking at eBay, like, what's she saying? And her talks are online, so go look. She says things like, if there was no autism, we'd have never invented fire. Everybody would have been just sat around talking. She says stuff like, if there was no autism, you better really like your computer because you're not getting another one. And at Google, she said, if there was no autism, you wouldn't have any new employees. It would be as simple as that. Okay. So this is pretty much the world's authority on autism saying it looks like there's a link between autism and IT, which I think isn't a huge shock to any of us. Temple also talks about autists as being different types of thinker. Now, she's a photorealistic thinker, which means that if you say to her, shoe, she will have, like, photograph-type images of shoes flash through her mind. She says it's like looking at Google images when she thinks about something, and then she has to abstract away from that to kind of find out what's common. And what Temple thinks is that the type of autistic mind that lends itself well to IT isn't necessarily the photorealistic thinker so much as it's visual spatial thinker. So folks in IT tend to be really good at understanding where things are in space, okay? The relationship between things, the relationship between objects, patterns. What Baron Cohen sometimes calls the systemizing brain. So another great speaker on autism, this is Steve Silberman. Steve Silberman, great TED Talk, The Forgotten History of Autism, really amazing. Steve Silberman, one of my favorite quotes, says, by autistic standards, the neurotypical brain is easily distractible, obsessively social, and suffers from a deficit of attention to detail. So why this link between autism and tech? Why it's helpful? What are some of the helpful traits of autism that are useful to us in the land of technology? First of all, autistic folk tend to have really, really special interests. Like, they can get absolutely immersed in a special interest. I'm sure you've all heard stories of kids that have, like, memorized train timetables or something like that, right? And have pretty much encyclopedic knowledge of their specialist subject. And who wouldn't want that in IT, right? Who wouldn't want that? That's absolutely amazing. Somebody's completely immersed in the subject. And just to give you an example from my kind of historical background in IT, I used to work for IBM. I went in to do a job for them at a large supermarket just around the time, so this is some time ago, where the European Working Time Directive had just been brought in. Hey, we probably don't have to worry about that anymore. I hadn't thought about that, the whole Brexit thing. So the European Working Time Directive had just come in. And so so the supermarket was concerned. They had people clocking in and out, you know, with the times that they were doing and stuff. And they needed some new stuff in place to make sure that the rules weren't being contravened, or that if they were, that person had opted out, because so happens you can opt out from the Working Time Directive too. And when I first started, so I was kind of a business analyst then. I was given the Working Time Directive. I can't remember how big it was, like yay big, on my desk. I went away that night. I came in the next morning and I'd memorized the document, and I didn't think that was odd at all until I went into a meeting and they started talking at the meeting, all these people who knew a lot about the Working Time Directive, and I'd say stuff like, oh, well, there's something on page 3, right? And it completely conflicts with what it says on page 42, like about halfway down. And so they called me mustard after that because I was so keen on that particular project. But that's just one example of how, you know, we can just get so intensely interested in something that we can really, 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 really get involved in wanting to know everything about it. And here's another example of a special interest, because sometimes when we talk about autism, people think of Rain Man, think of savants, and sometimes these abilities, these amazing, incredible abilities that some autistic folk may have, come from that intense interest. So I'm a bit of a geek. I went to Comic-Con in Exeter about a month ago, and I walked past this stall, and I thought, oh, they're selling photos of people. And the guy there said, oh, have a look. Actually, they're pictures, they're drawings. So I looked a bit closer. Turns out they're drawings. He said, oh, my eldest son's autistic. He was thrown out of the schooling system in the UK because he couldn't really attend to stuff, and it didn't, you know, he had sensory issues, he had attentional issues. So basically the schools gave up on him, and he went home and taught himself to draw. He shut himself in his bedroom day after day after day, drawing. And after 2 years, his dad told me this, and it made me cry actually, his dad told me he walked out of his bedroom with that. And his dad said, like, the hairs on the back of his neck literally stood up. And now he sells his work online, so you can go look at that if you want to. But a great example then, for sure this is somebody with an innate drawing ability. He's done lots of amazing pictures, but also just goes to show how that intense interest, that just working at it without stopping, can be hugely beneficial. Okay. Probably a good point, actually, just to pause and say, there's a saying in autistic circles, which is, if you meet a person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So I'm doing some sweeping generalizations right now that may well not apply to certain people with autism. Okay. So some folks with autism are really great with repetitive tasks. I quite like repetitive tasks, actually. There's something really soothing about doing something that somebody else might find really boring. Something really kind of safe and nice feeling about the fact that you're doing something repetitive. And there are plenty of places out there that are specifically targeting people with autism for jobs in testing, areas of testing that are repetitive. So SAP, Microsoft, and that's without even thinking about the specialist companies that are only looking at folks with autism, like Specialist Stern and so, and in fact, in Neurotribe, Steve Silberman mentions the supervisor at Microsoft who says that all of his top debuggers have aspergers because they can hold hundreds of lines of code in their minds at one time, and they can see patterns that don't match really, really quickly. Okay. Also, so we've said intense areas of interest, we've said repetitive tasks. Also, when Temple Grandin said, we think that visuospatial thinkers, autistic visuospatial thinkers, might be the kind of brains that are really, really good in the IT space. Again, that made me remember some research. That's pretty much my all-time favorite piece of research, which was done by a lady called Marion Petrie and a guy called Alan Blackwell. He's at Cambridge, he's at the Open University, around expert, actually it's software design they were looking at. So here's what they did. They wanted to find out about solving wicked problems, solving the really tricky stuff, right? Those really horrible, thorny bits. So they looked at kind of the studies that have been done, very small academic studies that have been done with small groups solving small problems. And they were like, we want a really tricky problem. We want a kind of industries type, proper, real tricky problem. So they got some very, very experienced designers, and they posed each of them a tricky problem. And they said, right, what we want you to do is talk us through how you're solving the problem. So they sat down, they recorded what they were saying, and they'd talk and talk and talk. Now I'm doing this, now I'm thinking about this, now I'm going to draw a diagram about this, whatever it might be. And then sometimes they'd go quiet. And actually, those quiet times ended up being the most interesting, because whenever they went quiet, Marion and Alan and their research assistants would say, what's happening now? What's happening now? Why have you gone quiet? Which must have been a tiny bit annoying, but... so when they said what's happening now, they were absolutely really surprised. And I think probably the people who started expressing what was happening now were surprised too, to find out that they started to describe these crazily rich, multi-dimensional mental models that they had when they were solving these problems. They said stuff like, and I'm again going to quote this, so they said stuff like, it's like a great bristling multicolored scaffolding of pipework and gadgets floating in space. They said stuff like, oh, well, that happens over there on the horizon, so I can keep an eye on it, but I don't really need to know about it. And they said stuff like, it's like describing all the dimensions of a problem in 2 dimensions, but there's a 3rd dimension that I can also sense, which is how close that particular area is to solution. And when they talked about these mental models that they had, they were not only rich, but they were stoppably dynamic as well. So they could go, what happens if we roll it forward a little bit, or roll it back again and change something and then change it again, just like we do with debuggers. And again, that resonated with me, because I can remember doing some database design and having this kind of mental image of skyscrapers and bridges that helped them, and standing at the bottom and trying to work out how I was going to put it all together. So visual spatial thinking definitely seems like it would be something very helpful. All right, so let's go on to what's tricky. How do we support the autistic mind, or whatever it might be, in tech? So this is they call it the triad of difficulties that's used for diagnosis. So you need to have difficulties in all these 3 areas. Language and communication, so that's stuff like, I might find it difficult to understand turn-taking in conversations. I might talk right over the top of you, or not let you finish what you're saying. And I might really want to rabbit on about my specialist subject nonstop. And if you try and change the topic, I might pull it back to my favorite subject all the time. Okay? Just like I have the luxury of doing right now. So an example from my home life, actually. So my son, Zach, who's autistic, got the norovirus. You know, it was kind of being sick everywhere. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning, head over the toilet, violently ill, looks up at me. I want to make it really graphic and say he wiped the vomit from his, but anyway, looked up at me and said, "Mummy," and I said, "Yeah," and I expected, I feel awful, can I have a glass of water, can I have a cuddle, something like that. Do you know what he said? He looked up at me, "Mummy, having just been sick everywhere, what?" Well, you know in Super Mario, and then that's it, blah, 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 Super Mario. So, specialist subject fixation right there. Social and emotional. So social and emotional area might struggle with unstructured parts of the day, might struggle with unstructured collaboration, might struggle with eye contact. Not necessarily, but may do. I know personally, I do okay in small groups. I do okay if we're doing an activity, even if that activity is eating, which is relatively unstructured, I'm good. But you put me into like a cocktail party, or like I'm afraid I ducked out of the social thing at the end of the day yesterday because I don't understand what the rules are, and I get kind of a bit short-circuited. Like, when can I start a conversation with somebody? And when it's okay to move off and talk to somebody else? And how do I know if I'm boring somebody or not, right? I'm really not very good at picking up on those social cues. And finally, flexibility of thought. So again, struggling with changes. There might be changes in routine or changes in environment. And literal thinking. So there's a great experiment, this is from 1983, called the Sallyann experiment, which I might be a little biased in liking, that was originally done by Wimmer and Pernell in 1983. So the idea is there's two dolls, Sally and Anne. Sally has a basket and Anne has a box. Sally has a marble. She puts her marble in her basket and leaves. Okay. While Sally's not there, Anne takes the basket out of takes the marble out of Sally's basket and puts it in her box. Okay. The observer is asked, when Sally comes back, where will she look for the marble? Anyone know where will she look for the marble? Right, where she left it. Okay. And that's really obvious to us because we have good theory of mind. We can understand that other people don't necessarily know everything we know. But a literal autistic thinker will expect that when Sally comes back, she'll know what I know. So she'll look for the marble where I looked for it, okay, which wouldn't be where she left it. And that literal thinking, that lack of theory of mind is really interesting as well. And it's something that I know I struggle with in terms of, like, what does everyone know and what does no one know? What do I know that's special or what do I know that's different to other people? Okay. So along with autism and ADHD and a lot of other neurodiverse things, often comes sensory processing disorder. And sensory processing disorder is like a miscalibration of one or many of the senses. They can be over or undersensitive. They can even be, annoyingly, targetedly over and undersensitive at the same time. So if we think about the senses, so what have we got? Let's do vision, okay? So maybe if I'm oversensitive visually, I would struggle with bright lights. Actually, I'm really glad you stopped taking photos, because when you're taking photos before, I was like, that flash is going to totally, I'll lose track of what I'm saying because I will be so focused on it. So bright lights in the workplace, some people might not even deal with those. They might need like a little cap or a baseball hat or darkened glasses or filters. Or people sometimes can be visually undersensitive and they might not see signs, they might bang into stuff. I'm forever pushing a door that's got a pull sign written right there in my face. It takes me about 3 goes before I remember to read it. And that might also be true of sound. So I could be oversensitive to sound, which means I would find it really, really hard to focus in this kind of environment. Because if you imagine what you're hearing in an open plan environment turned up to 11, that's how that would be for somebody with that particular sensory processing issue. Or it might be the other way. So I might not be able to moderate my own voice. I might speak really loudly all the time because that just doesn't seem that loud to me. Okay, really interesting if you have two. I was on the train once with 2 people like that sat next to each other. A guy on the phone really loud and another guy just who eventually moved to another carriage so he could do his work. You can have the same with taste, so don't always go for a team curry, right? Because maybe that's too strong. You can have the same with smell. You know, there's air conditioners that go and just send a scent out every now and again. So distracting. Do you hate that or do you love that? I don't know. But again, you can be over or undersensitive to these things. So one of the things that I did with my son just on the flight over here, because he doesn't do very well on long flights, is we bought some scented flavored lip balm for him, and he just kind of sniffed it when he got a little bit stressed out, and that was good. So it can be calming too. And then there are another couple of senses. So anyone know the other couple that are tricky for people? Yep, so there's touch as well. So touch, if we're undersensitive to touch, I might be a keyboard banger, really loud. You've probably got one of those in your office maybe. Or if I'm the other way, if I'm oversensitive to touch, I might be sensitive to like the material of the seats, particular clothing. So any more senses? Anyone know? So we have the vestibular system, which is our inner ear, tells us about balance. I may well rock on my chair to reestablish my sense of balance if I don't feel if my vestibular system needs more stimulation. We also have the proprioceptive system, which I think is a really fascinating one. So the proprioceptive system tells me where my body's located in space. And you'd think the other senses do that, wouldn't you? But they don't. So if I can offer you the opportunity, if you want to close your eyes and put your right arm out. Try not to bash anybody. So right arm out to the side, close your eyes, stick out your index finger. Okay, now pull it back in and touch your nose. That's your proprioceptive system right there. Okay, so if my proprioceptive system is under or oversensitive, I may either feel really uncomfortable, or I might need to go and move around or press or feel pressure to remember what shape my body is. Crazy is that? So let me tell you what I think is the most inspiring, since I've been looking at all this stuff, the most inspiring story of autism and IT I've come across. So this is Jamie and Sallyann. Jamie blogs, he's on Twitter. He's a very successful software developer. He's been in IT for 10 years. He works for the BBC. He's got code on pretty much every single web page that the BBC's got. He's written code that's run in space. And he's profoundly autistic. Most of the time, Jamie is entirely non-verbal. He doesn't speak. Sometimes he'll speak at a conference, and then he'll be nonverbal again afterwards. He stims, he hums, he sings. Jamie's wearing an inflatable vest here that he can fill with air to put pressure on his body. He says that when he's stressed, it feels like his atoms are dispersing into a cloud in space, and he forgets that he's even got a shape. So he can do that. And Jamie has hacked his flat to support him. So he, on his phone, can press a button that says he's stressed out, and the lights will dim in his flat to an appropriate level for him. He's changed the fire alarms so that they don't make a distressing noise for him. They just say, I can't remember exactly what, but something like, Jamie, you need to get out of the building. And then they send a message to his Slack group that support him. So, so Jamie's got a job at the BBC. Sallyan's got a job at the BBC too. He takes Sallyann everywhere with him. Sallyan's job is head of antelope management at BBC. They don't get many antelopes, but Sallyann said that's what he wanted to do, and everyone's too scared to argue, I think. So that's Jamie and Sallyann. You can find out all about them online. I think he's got an amazing, supportive group of friends around him as well that call themselves the herders, which is pretty fab. So that's autism. I just want to touch on a couple of other types of neurodiversity as well. So ADHD, if we think autism's prevalent, 1 in 68 people. In the UK, I didn't get a chance to look up in Canada, 3 to 4% of people in the UK, of adults, have got ADHD. So what do we know about ADHD? Well, it can be hard for people with ADHD to tune out stimulus from the environment and hone in on things to concentrate on. Recently, I read a thing where they'd asked people with ADHD to explain what it's like, and someone said it's like having 100 different browser windows open at once and trying to do something different in every single one, and then somebody comes and starts talking to you. That's what ADHD feels like. Again, that really resonates with me. So my autistic son's got a kind of side order of ADHD as well. When we went to the consultant, he said we could medicate him, but that's kind of the only route you've got to go down, and we really didn't want to do that at the time and still don't feel that it's necessary for him. But I watched him in a classroom. So I used to run a voluntary code club and go in after school and teach kids Scratch and stuff. And I was setting up once, and I was watching him in a maths class. And the teacher was teaching them greater than or less than. It was a few years ago. And she said, OK, so here's greater than or less than as a basic concept. And then she went around every child in the group and said, so is such and such, is 10 greater than or less than 5? Is 7 greater or less than blah, blah, blah? And my son, Zach, was swinging on his chair, looking out the window like this. And she'd say, Zach, you're not concentrating. Zach, focus. And I just looked and thought, you know what? Zach got that probably 30 seconds in, and now he's looking out of the window, trying to work out whether the ratio of something like windows to doors on the building is different, or whether it's, whether it still works if it's a different type of thing that you're comparing rather than numeric or whatever. His brain's totally just taken it and gone off in some completely different place. So it's not about not concentrating on the subject, it's just about having a real, like, a diversification. One of the things that people often don't know about people with ADHD is, as well as having this difficulty zooming in on stuff sometimes when there's a lot around to distract you, folks with ADHD often are able to do complete hyperfocus as well, like a superpower. They can totally hyperfocus to the extent when, it can almost get to a dangerous extent when you might like forget to eat or forget to sleep or whatever, because you're just so tuned in on this one particular area. And again, this hyperfocus is incredibly valuable. It's definitely something that we want to take, right? So people who can just focus on in this intense way. Bipolar disorder. So 2 to 3% of the population have got bipolar disorder as well, which again is like a miscalibration, but this time it's a miscalibration of mood. So maybe if we all swing from happy to sad here, then it's more extreme. And you can have slow or fast cycling in bipolar disorder. My mother's been bipolar my whole life. She's a real slow cycler. She's hypermanic at the moment, which is kind of hilarious, sort of. And she might stay that way for 3 months or so and then cycle back down. Typical things with bipolar disorder that we see are a crazy amount of energy, like practically no sleep at all and just keep going and going and going. Racing thoughts, lack of sleep, grandiose kind of delusions, like, oh, you just can't keep up with me because I'm super clever, and da-da-da, and lack of concern for the usual social constraints. So my mum might, for example, go, actually, I'm feeling really tuned into green today, so I'm only going to wear green, I'm only going to eat green stuff, and I'm only going to speak to you if you're wearing something green. So what we forget about sometimes, though, is when people are in that manic state, it can be incredibly intensely creative. And again, it can mean that their brains aren't taking the quickest route from A to B. That's the one that people usually take, right? So if we're looking for a creative solution, this can be a good thing. And when I was looking into this stuff, I asked people, and I'm sorry, I forgot to do this in the ADHD one, but I asked people in my field, well-known consultants in my field of like Agile, to tell me about, neurodiversity issues they had and how they thought that it helped them in their work. So just to recap a little bit, the person with ADHD said, the skills developed living with ADHD have given me coaching superpowers like intuition, because I can pick up on some of the background stuff that's going on that other people will miss. The person with the quote for bipolar disorder said, I love this, said, when I'm in my manic state, my mental filters are degraded, and that means that I'm less judgmental and I can recognize patterns that I otherwise wouldn't identify. I understand the value of ideas that are seemingly unrelated, and I put things together. And not only this, but it helps me solve problems I'm struggling with. Rather than immediately trust patterns as truth now, I just use them as potential ideas and test them out to see if they work or not. And now that I'm practiced at spotting potential patterns, I no longer need to be in a manic state to do so. Okay. So last one, depression. So nearly 20% of adults in the UK have experienced clinical depression at some point in their lives. Again, I'm sorry I don't have the statistics for Canada. In a study of 1,000 eminent people in different areas, 77% of artists, 54% of fiction writers, 50% of visual artists, 46% of composers had all had at least one significant depressive episode. And you're probably wondering why I've got my bus that I'm renovating up here. So it turns out, though, that people with depression are spookily good at assessing reality, like spookily good, okay? And there have been studies around this, and the one I kind of like talking about the best is a study that was done around driving aptitude. So if you ask 100 people do you think you're in the top 50% of aptitude for driving your car? They will almost all say, yeah, I'm in the top 50%, which clearly, statistically, isn't possible. Right? We can't all be the best drivers. It's just not going to work. Okay. So in the US, 93% of people put themselves in the top 50%. Even more interestingly, there have been studies on this very phenomenon that have only gone to hospitals and asked people who've been in driving accidents that they say were their own fault, right? And nearly everybody still thinks they're better than an average driver. Apart from one group. So in 1988, Taylor and Brown found that there's the folks that accurately assess ability, there's one group, and that's the clinically depressed. Which makes sense, I think, because we, maybe as a species, it's helped us to be overly optimistic. We've tried things we shouldn't be able to do. It's helped us evolve. But we haven't necessarily got a very balanced view of our abilities, whereas people with depression have this really balanced view. And again, so I asked somebody, very eminent person within my field, who I know has struggled with depression, and that person said, depression's sharpened my empathy. It's helped me every single day in my job. I meet people where they are. I care. I connect with people super fast. I listen with my whole being, and that enables me to hear not only what's being said, but instinctively I know to ask the right questions. Okay. So I think hopefully what I'm starting to build for you is a picture of how all of these different types of minds, whilst they have things that they struggle with, they also have superpowers that we totally want as part of our team. So how can we better support them? Okay, routine. Same time, same place, same thing happens, like stand-up meetings or daily scrums or whatever you want to call them, right? Same time, same place, same kind of questions. That works really well. I found with my son, if I do him a timetable, even if I put unstructured activity or fun time or something, he knows between this o'clock and this o'clock it's going to be unstructured. He's good. Personas. So in Janet's workshop yesterday, we talked about personas. Personas are great for theory of mind, right? If I don't create personas and I struggle with theory of mind, who am I going to create software for? Me. Am I probably the target user? I don't expect so. Okay, so personas can really help. Kanban boards, or any kind of board, right? So I've done something a bit cheeky here. On the right, there's a Kanban board. On the left, this is a visual timetable for an autistic child. Okay. So that really tangible nature of being able to see, what am I working on? What comes next? How is it progressing through the system is really, really helpful. Okay, having structured meetings, events, ceremonies, whatever you call them, keeping them short, having an agenda, writing down actions clearly and concisely. Have you ever had that where someone said, you've said, yeah, you understand what you need to go and do, yeah? And someone said, yeah, that's fine, I'll do that. And they haven't really wanted to say that they didn't. And then you come back and you re-meet and they haven't done it. And it gets quite frustrating. So writing things down, actions in a really concise, short manner is very helpful. And not assuming that everyone's going to think on their feet. So this is something that I'm doing some work with Catherine Kirk on at the moment with inclusive collaboration, is how do we give people time? How do we give people the opportunity to think? How do we create quiet spaces in our collaborative workshops and things that we need to do together? And how do we minimize surprises for people? Working agreements. So this is something we can do anyway. It's great. So a lot of these things support people neurodiversity, but they're great for any team anyway, like using personas or being able to visualize the work. So this is working agreements. Again, this isn't a working agreement for a team. Quite often if I go in as a coach with a team, we'll set up working agreements of how we're going to work together as a group. This is some working agreements. So this is, again, for an autistic child. It says, at home, I can take a deep breath and relax. I can ask for help. I can tell someone how I feel. I never scream, run away, have a tantrum, or spit. Hopefully you don't need that in your meeting. But, you know, maybe. But just having this really clear, like, this is acceptable behavior, this is, you know, how we're going to, and here are the things that people are going to struggle with, can be so, so helpful. Capitalizing on special interests, so, and expanding upon them. So Someone told me a great story once about somebody on their team who was pretty obsessive about coding standards. That was like their specialist thing, and they were a little bit Aspergers. They used to, in whatever meeting, they used to get really frustrated. They used to get really frustrated. Well, hang on, you didn't absolutely follow all of the coding standards or the UI guidelines or whatever it was. It has to be like perfect. And they'd be really nitpicky. And sometimes you just need to get something out fast, and it would be frustrating. And so what they did was they moved this person, and now this person specializes in coding standards, and that's what they do. They bring new starters in, they teach them the coding standards, they help people understand how to run code reviews, they own that area, and that works really well for them. So capitalizing on those specialist areas and expanding them is definitely a good thing to do. Providing multimodal information as well. So this is just a load of my notes. What I've done is made them a little bit difficult to read. So if I've got ADHD or if I've got dyslexia, which I haven't really particularly talked about and won't in this talk, or if I'm autistic, I might not be able to cope with great swathes of written information. If I'm a visuospatial thinker, I would need some of that to be dispersed with diagrams that help me understand information, or I might be able to, or I might need just like little bullet points or short things. And in fact, Richard Branson taught dyslexia, helping him in his career because he couldn't go through swathes and swathes of reports, so he had to scan for salient points and just be really good at gut feel. And he's like, that's how I kind of got successful at honing my gut feel for business. Succinct. So, how do I be succinct about explaining being succinct? My son had a teacher who took a while to understand the way that his brain worked. And she used to do this. You need to go and put this in your bag. Zach, at this point, probably hasn't even clocked there's a noise, right? Zach, you need to go and put this in your bag, otherwise you'll forget to take it home. Zach's clocked there's a noise now. He's not quite sure what it was. Zach, you need to put this in your bag and take it home, otherwise you won't be able to do your homework tonight. Okay. Now clock there's a noise, knows that someone's talking and thinks they might be talking to him. Zach, right, so this thing, you need to take it into your bag because otherwise you're going to forget to take it home, forget to do your homework. When you come in tomorrow, you'll have to do it in break time and then you won't have to be able to have any fun. He can't keep all of that in his brain at once, so he just hears having fun at the end, goes, okay. And what we're training people to do with Zach, so here's what I do. Zach, it's time to go to school, you need to get your shoes on. Zach, you need to get your shoes on. Zach, shoes on. Shoes, 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 shoes. Go. And there's a trick, which is to just know that the first time he doesn't even know there's a noise. Then he knows there's a noise. Then he knows that someone's talking. Then he knows someone's talking to him. Then he knows to attend to what you're saying. So if you're making that 10 times as long, he's not going to be able to parse it. So if you think someone's struggling to understand, you're trying to tell them because you're being quite wordy about it, make it smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller rather than adding information, adding information, adding information, adding information. Okay? Cool. Interacting's exhausting. Sometimes. So this is John Cage's piece, 4 minutes 33, which is 4 minutes 33 of the musicians doing nothing. Although sometimes they pose a little. But. So I like to think of this in terms of Susan Cain's work about introverts and extroverts. So Susan Cain has written a great book called Quiet. And she distinguishes between introverts and extroverts by saying extroverts, they can both do the same kinds of things. There's nothing that an introvert can't do that an extrovert can do, or reverse, or vice versa. Only that extroverts gain energy from interacting with people, and introverts lose energy interacting with people. Okay. So an introvert is perfectly capable of doing, intense collaboration and all that kind of stuff, just it will be really, really draining. One of the things I've learned about myself, if I'm doing like a whole day training session, at the end of the day, I don't go and do a social activity with anybody. I go to my hotel room, I lie in the dark, and I don't talk to anybody for a few hours, because I'm kind of like, that's drained all my socializing out of me, and I haven't got any left to give. Pacing is important. Breaks are important, rests are important. When I studied pair programmers, even those that said we exclusively pair did not go in at 9 o'clock in the morning or whenever they started, sit in a pair all day long until they went home that night. They had time for email, they had meetings, they had breaks, they had rest. They typically pair, maybe 4 or 5 hours a day with breaks. A couple of months ago, I was giving a talk just like this. And at question time, someone said to me, oh, you've made me realize, because I'm just redesigning our physical layout space at work, and we wanted to have breakout areas so people could have rests. But in those breakout areas are collaborative things, like table football and ping pong and stuff like that. So there's no way you can go to just be on your own. So he's like, I'm going to have a bit of a redesign now and a bit of a rethink. And you can help provide structure as well. So when things are socially freeform, and that might be a bit difficult, I am often seen at parties and things doing the washing up, like gathering plates up and doing the dishes, just because it gives me a bit of a break from socializing and provides some structure. I have friends who are in a band. Sometimes they're playing somewhere that I don't know anybody, and I'm like, oh, when they're on stage, I won't know anyone, and I'll have to like mix. They let me work on their t-shirt stall, because again, that's structure. I can do that, so I can still enjoy myself. And there's an autistic journalist called Dean Beadle who put this really well as well, because it helps with prolonged eye contact. He said, if someone with autism wants to talk to you about something stressful, then why on earth would you stand face-to-face here with them if they struggle with eye contact? There's a reason why someone with autism might approach you for a difficult conversation while you're doing the washing up, or when you're in the car, driving, because you can't do the intense eye contact that makes that person feel uncomfortable. All right, so last couple of slides. Continually busy, open plan, noisy environments with lots of, with loads on the walls and lots of stuff around. Whilst I love that hugely, and I was right there, you know, knocking down walls, wanting people to collaborate, I think we've got to a place now where we have to offer alternatives and quiet spaces for people. We can't expect people to exclusively work in these open plan environments. We need to provide a safe and forgiving environment that pays attention to people's varying needs but doesn't single them out. We need to understand really that saying, I just need to go and make a cup of tea is much easier than saying, I need to go and move around to re-establish my body's position in space. And this is one that I'm still struggling with a little bit. We need to learn to be okay with silence. I'll tell you a top trick. This is kind of in memory of my good friend, Jean Baker, who sadly passed away about a month or so ago. She taught me this, and it's really good for facilitation as well. So if you ask a group a question, it's really tempting, if you're uncomfortable with silence, to just wait a couple of seconds and then fill in the answer for them, which isn't really asking the group a question. So what Jean taught me, and what I now do, is I ask the question, and then sneakily, and you'll know now if I'm doing this, because you're behind my back, I count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4. By about 7 or 8, somebody else has got more uncomfortable than me, and they say something. So that's my top tip for silence. I'm just going to quickly, I have loads of academic references and stuff on the end of the talk, so they're all up there. I'll make the slides available on my blog. I don't know if is there a cast place that I can put slides?
We can tweet a link to your blog.
Yeah, perfect. Just a bit of happy news, some great stuff that's going on. So SAP, Autism Recruitment Guide, Microsoft specialist hiring program, where rather than going for a single interview or 2 interviews, they now hire autistic folk over like a 3-month program. And there's companies here which are specifically are looking now and understanding the benefits of autism, and Platinum Bay, a software development and testing company entirely made up of autistic folks, Specialiston and Focus, who are here, I think, looking at placing autistic people into tech jobs. So there's some great stuff going on out there. That's it. Thank you very much. Can I sit down for the questions, everyone? Is that okay? Thank you.
First, thank you, because a lot of these things are viewed as very negative, and getting people to recognize that they're not horrible is pretty important. But also, I'm sorry, I'm kind of emotional because you really freaked me out.
Are you a hugger? Can I give you a hug?
That might be good. So my question is, the more you're talking, the more I'm like, how in the world is... So where can I find out more? Where do I start? Because if this is me, there's got to be tools for me to handle it. Because it was scary, because I'm like, oh, autism. Well, I know what autism is. It's the church whose face is flat. And the more you're talking, the more I'm like, I have no clue what you're talking about. And then you started listing it. I'm like, wait, what? So where do I start at finding out, is this just coincidence? Because that does happen. Or is this something that I might tools to better handle my world?
So, I'll cry in a minute as well.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. So what I found, personally for me, is that finding out that I've probably got autism has been sometimes scary, sometimes difficult, but mostly really empowering. Like, now I can say to my husband, do you know what, I can't watch that on TV because I haven't finished that other box set, and I can't do two things at once because my brain won't do that. Or I can say to my, I don't know, the guy at my gym, I'm like, actually, do you mind if I line my equipment up so it matches the stuff on the floor, because otherwise I'm going to really struggle. And it's like giving me the freedom to say, I'm okay with this, and I'm going to stop struggling to not be me, because it's exhausting. So actually, although it's frightening and difficult, I find it incredibly empowering too. As to where you go, I don't know. I just kind of stuff, looked at, you know, I just lapped up every single resource I could possibly find. So I started off by watching Temple's YouTube talks, reading her books, and then I mean, obviously with my son as well, there were courses that I could go on as a parent. All of which I found hugely, hugely helpful. So good luck. Thank you. Sorry, did I break your televising?
You made quite a compelling case of working with people with autism, and what I see around in the market is a trend of more socializing, more noise, and more collaboration. And it seems to be that these are the exact points that are difficult. So can these two things, let's say, work together? Can we still keep the collaborative part to taxing to these kind of people? And do you see currently any change? Because I would imagine that working in the IT industry today is more difficult to people with autism than it was 5 years ago.
So I agree. 25 years ago, when I started as a developer, somebody would put a spec on my desk and leave me alone for the day. I maybe would put some headphones on or whatever. I'd go home at the end of the day. From an autistic point of view, that was helpful. From a creating the right product point of view, that was disastrous. So I think we need to find the balance there. And I'm hoping, so these talks, these sessions that I'm giving, I do trainings as well. I'm hoping just awareness to the sensitivity that, yes, the collaboration's important. We don't want to stop doing the things that we now value and know are great. And I'm like the queen of collaboration. I love collaboration. But what we need to do is be sensitive to how can we provide breaks for people? How can we provide structure? Things like talking tokens, some of it we've done automatically. So people are struggling because they want to talk about their specialist subject all the time and they're not very good with turn taking. Well, we use talking tokens a lot, right? Maybe in our daily stand-ups or whatever, and we know that things like that are helpful because they give a nice, clear... So, I don't think collaboration is going to go away, and I very much hope it doesn't. And I don't think open plan is going to go away. And again, peripheral awareness is a great thing, and I can see why that's hugely beneficial. But I think we just need to offer alternatives and be more sensitive. And just to be clear, this isn't just about like employing autistic people. This is about the fact that you have them in your teams, in your organizations, or maybe it's you right now. We're just not great at supporting them yet. Supporting each other, yeah.
How do we support people if, because where I'm struggling is I actually think we have somebody on our team, but if they don't tell me that they're struggling, how do I know how I need to support them? Right. So like, do we wait till we see them struggling and ask? Or like, you know, how do you make the environment to even like to support them, like, you know what I mean, that it's safe for them to say something.
So for sure, if you see somebody struggling with something, I would have thought asking them if they're struggling, if there's anything you could do with help, would definitely be a good thing to do. But some of the things like team charters, when you start off with a new team or when you change team composition, there's just something that's good to do anyway. Like, how are we going to work together? What makes it difficult or easy for us as a group of human beings to work together? And that doesn't have to be particularly targeted towards, you know, I'm not suggesting that we try and work out who might have autism on our team, that we point at them and say, you seem a bit autistic, what are you going to struggle with? Because that's awful, right? But what I am suggesting is that we get together as a group and say, what are our needs? What are our group needs? And one of the great things about this is somebody might say, well, you know, actually I struggle with it being quite noisy in here. Someone else who's not on the autistic spectrum might say, well, I really struggle with that as well. I've had a situation where I went to an organization with an Agile transformation. They got more, they went more open plan and they changed the lighting. And some of the older people that work there struggled with the fluorescent lights, and it wasn't about autism or ADHD or anything. It was just like their site struggled to read black text on white paper under a fluorescent light. And so I think these, you know, catering for each other's needs is just generally a good thing to do.
So I was fortunate to be able to hear Temple, and there were two I took away from her talk. One was that she solves problems in an entirely different way, which is incredibly valuable. The second thing that I took from her talk was she said that her social skills were not that great and that her boss had to tell her to take a bath. So one of the things that, in answer to the person who just asked the question before, is you need to look and watch what people are doing and get their nonverbal cues. And if they're doing something that is, so they'll tell you that they're stressed out, and you need to watch for the nonverbal cues. But she's absolutely fantastic.
I also had the pleasure of meeting Temple. I work for Qualcomm, and we've brought her in as a speaker. A couple things in that. I also have a son who's ADHD, and I have a nephew who's severely autistic. The one thing that she did leave us with at Qualcomm was this: those of us that are in a position to hire, and we do hire, she says because of her social awkwardness per se, she would never get through the first level of interviewing. So we have to partner with the HR gal who's very bubbly and outstanding and, you know, looking for that kind of energy, if you will. And a lot of these people that offer these alternative ways of thinking do not exhibit that at the first level of interviewing. So we have to be cognizant of, hey, not everybody's going to be fearful and whatnot. And she says, it basically goes, I will never get through your first level of interviewing here at Qualcomm and at most engineering-centric companies. So just a comment that it's out there. By the way, there is a movie about her life. I'm sure you know about it. It's a phenomenal movie if you ever want to read more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. The movie's just called Temple Grandin, and it stars Claire Danes as Temple. When I met Temple, she said it really is. They took her on set, and she's got a detailed mind, and she was just like, it is exactly how it all happens as well. So, really fascinating movie. Thank you.
So, my wife is bipolar type 2, and when I think about my friends, several of them are also bipolar. I'm not bipolar. I have dyslexia a little bit. Maybe I'm on the spectrum somewhere. I'm not high on the spectrum, I don't think. What is it about me that attracts or retains bipolar people in my personal life? And how can I support people with bipolar in my professional life?
I don't know you, so I can't say what attracts or what attracts bipolar, how that has happened. I could. What's helped me cope with bipolar? So, bipolar disorders, again, and I'm sure, I only have the stories from my growing up with bipolar disorder from my mum. And I actually have 2 friends with bipolar disorder as well. And I have 2 sisters, and we often say that the positive aspects of growing up with a parent with quite severe bipolar disorder have been, firstly, we've laughed so much. She's done some stuff, my mum, some crazy, crazy things, some frightening, upsetting, crazy things. But we've always laughed. We've always taken a moment to laugh about them, and somehow that's really helped us cope. The other really positive thing that's come out of it is that all 3 of us are like, come on, world, bring it on, because we can cope with anything. So it's kind of it's built this resilience that I think has been really helpful for us in our lives. And personally, I don't know about your experiences, the depression part is really horrible, particularly for the person who's suffering with it at the time. The hypomanic part is really more difficult, I think, for the people surrounding the person suffering from the hypomania, because in the throes of hypomania, you're having an amazing time. Food tastes amazing, music sounds great, you're brilliant, your brain's firing on all cylinders, you're having an amazing time, but unfortunately it has quite a devastating effect on the people around you. So I think that's what my advice would be just build some tight support around you for getting you through those kind of hypomanic episodes that can be a little bit rocky.
And on the same thread, Sal, we've got one off the Twitter printer. I'm mildly autistic and often see jobs end badly for reasons I don't fully understand. What accommodations could prevent this?
Sorry, I didn't understand the second bit of what you said. So I'm mildly autistic and I often see jobs that are...
they end badly.
Oh, they end badly. So the thing that's really helped me, and I think this is kind of what I was mentioning before, was that this whole journey for me has empowered me to be more okay with just being me, with just standing my ground on stuff, with not fighting to fit in some kind of box. And I have personally found that it's a useful way of explaining my difficulties to people, to say, actually, I really struggle with unstructured social situations, so can we do something else instead, or whatever it might be. And asking for help has been massively, massively helpful. Now, at the same time, the reason I paused before answering was that might be really difficult for someone in a particular situation, to ask for help, to say, I think I'm a little bit autistic, or I'm struggling with this, that, and the other. So it's quite a hard thing I don't want to prescribe that if somebody's in a difficult situation, but it's definitely been super helpful for me.
So this sort of builds off what you've just said. I think one of the great things about building agile teams is that you can get a close-knit group of people that can support each other. And so I encourage feel that they can be open and honest about what is a problem for them to help understand the coping mechanisms. And once you have that support group in your team, when you're in a greater activity with another team or the rest of the company or another company, then your team will have your back and they will help you develop coping mechanisms. And I've seen some of that work, and I think it's powerful.
Absolutely. So I once coached a team where there was a lady who was often quite substantially late, and the team would, you know, grumble about it, but it never came up. Nobody felt like they wanted to say anything about it, and it became a bit of a bad feeling. And then one day, and this team had been for a few years at that point, one day this lady just came in and said, I'm kind of like, I want to tell you all this today. My daughter's profoundly autistic. Sometimes it takes an hour and a half in the morning to persuade her that the shoes I'm trying to put on her feet are her shoes. That's why I'm late. And everyone kind of went, oh, okay, well, now we understand. And better, you know, we can understand, we can accommodate, we can build, you know, we won't have meetings first thing in the morning, we won't, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because we know that might be a difficulty, rather than just, so one of the things that I try and help teams with, or where I come from, is to kind of assume positive intent, to assume that everyone's just doing their best. I really don't think there are many people in the world who get up in the morning and think, how can I be a pain in the arse and rubbish at my job today? So, you know, but it might seem like they are, right? Because we don't understand what's going on around them. So I think assuming positive intent is really helpful with that too.
Yeah, in relation to that though, you know, I've been on teams where the verbally that's what's said, but then the action doesn't follow it, or you ask for help and then you end up ostracized, or like it sounds really great, but then it comes to the review and all of a sudden, well, because you had to go out of your way. How do you have any tips on ways to explain things? Because sometimes it's just a matter of understanding, like the woman with not being able to arrive on time in the morning, and how to explain it and also have the courage to trust the new team. And do you have any tips or suggestions for that?
So trust is huge, right? Rachel Davies and I used to run trust workshops at conferences and stuff like that, and there's loads and loads of great stuff that's been written on trust. So trust is really key and really important if you're working in an Agile team too, and I think I see that as such a strong part of the kind of cultural shift that we often see in teams. How do you build trust? So there's a great book called The Trusted Advisor that I really like, and I can't remember, it's by Robert somebody. Sorry, I can't remember who. I'll look it up and I'll find you later and let you know.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that it may not be work for everyone, but part of your boss's job to help with that, to run interference for you, or to recalibrate other people, or to deal with people that are not handling that sort of thing well. That should be part of what they're there for.
Hi. So I agree with the idea of having neurodiversity in a team. We try to recruit diverse teams, but it's hard to recruit for diversity that you can't see. I was wondering if you had any tips on recruiting for a team that becomes neurodiverse. Like, how do you try and balance that?
So there are organisations there that specifically focus on helping people, particularly with autism, get into the workplace. So that's one thing. If you're thinking like, actually, you have a very homogenous team, and actually that's true not just for neurodiversity, but like any kind of diversity. Having a homogenous team isn't going to be a good, isn't going to be a super high performing team. We want to get to diverse teams, and that might be gender diversity or racial diversity or whatever. So I think it's the same issues, and again, I don't know that positive discrimination. I don't really know how I feel about that, but I know there are organisations out there that specifically do try and help more autistic people get into the workplace, and particularly for tech jobs. And I know that there's some here in Canada, and there's some here today. So those are places that you can hook up. But I guess maybe also, now I think about it, just making it clear that you're a neurodiverse diversity-friendly place to work when you're advertising for jobs, and also what somebody said just before about having a recruitment process that doesn't straight away screen out neurodiversity by mistake.
And we've got just enough questions for the last quick question, please, Kate.
Hi, I'm a manager, and this has definitely helped me hopefully be more sensitive and helpful to those around the spectrum of something. I think there's a lot of variety, and that's a good thing. Where I personally struggle is in helping them, there's limits to what I can do, especially with even the physical environments. We do have that open plan, which is very difficult for some people to be able to work effectively. We do work in the whole Agile cross-functional teams things, which is generally a really good thing, but does struggle with those people who are introverts or have other kinds of, how do I help the organization, the company, the culture that we work in be more sensitive to those of different points of view?
Okay, so I think there's two things. I think one is just education and awareness. I think the other one is, if you are restricted like that, like you have an office, you don't have a massive budget for changing it, you can provide noise cancelling headphones. You can say it's okay if you need to leave the building for like 15 minutes or whatever and go walk about and have a break. So even if, you know, there tend to be ways that you can provide spaces for people, even without having a huge budget to redo your whole office, there's things you can do to help, I think.
Wonderful, and that wraps up our open season and probably our most powerful keynote talk for CAST. Thank you very much.